From Washington, D.C., this is Middle East Focus.
Welcome to Middle East Focus. I'm Alistair Taylor, MEI's editorial director. And today we're going to be talking about the sharp escalation in U.S.-Iran tensions following the assassination of Iranian General Qassem Soleimani. General Soleimani, head of the Revolutionary Guards Quds Force, was killed in a U.S. drone strike in Baghdad on January 3rd, along with Iraqi paramilitary leader Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis. After several days of waiting to see how Iran might respond, on January 7th, Tehran launched more than a dozen missiles at two bases in Iraq housing U.S. forces. No casualties were reported, and in comments on January 8th, President Trump promised to impose new sanctions on Iran, but seemed to back away from further military action. To discuss where things stand now and where they might be headed, I'm joined today by two great guests, Randa and Alex Vatanka. Randa's a senior fellow and the director of the Conflict Resolution and Track 2 Dialogues program here at MEI, and a longtime Iraq watcher. Alex is a senior fellow at MEI as well, and an expert on Iran. Randa, Alex, welcome back to the podcast, and thank you both for joining us today.
Good to be with you.
Alex, I'd like to start with you. Before we get into the latest developments, can you give us a bit of background on who Qassem Soleimani was and the role he played in Iran and the wider region?
Sure. I mean, look, Qassem Soleimani, if you follow the Western coverage of his assassination and funeral, you would think the man has been a long-term national hero back in Iran. But the real picture is much more complicated than that. I mean, he started off as a young man, about 20 years of age, when he joined the Revolutionary Guards, and he spent 8 years as one of the prominent commanders of the Revolutionary Guards fighting Saddam Hussein's Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War. So in that sense, Soleimani and that generation of young Revolutionary Guards people who came from not a military background, but a sort of a normal background, but chose to defend the homeland. If you look at his background and personality from that perspective, yes, he was a son of the motherland who rose up and defended Iran. The Qassem Soleimani that emerges after the Iran-Iraq War is a different matter, and to my mind, a controversial figure, because he then becomes the face, if you will, certainly one of the key players in exporting Iran's Islamist ideology in places, like Lebanon, and defending Iranian interests in Afghanistan, and certainly when the power vacuum is created after the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, he becomes a key player in that country, in Iraq. And he does the same thing after 2011 when a power vacuum is created in Syria. Now, you can then look at Qassem Soleimani from two different points of view. There are his supporters who defend him and would claim when he was in Afghanistan fighting the Taliban, he was defending Iranian homeland. That when he went into Iraq after 2003 and set up various proxy groups that were pro-Iran, he was supporting Iran. Then when he went in support of Assad in 2011, again, that was advancing Iranian national interest in the fight against ISIS. His opponents believe that the picture is not that straightforward, that he was not necessarily defending Iranian national interests, but was the spearhead of this promotion of Iran's ideology. And that promotion has brought about all the troubles on Iran, including U.S. sanctions, the misgivings and suspicions that exist in so many of Iran's neighboring states about what Iran is doing in the region. So, yes, you can look at Qassem Soleimani in two different ways, depending which Qassem Soleimani you want to look at. But it's very, as far as I'm concerned, it's very obvious that, he is a divisive figure.
Alex, how significant was his killing, and what impact has it had so far in Iran?
I think it's early to sort of predict the long-term impact, but in the short term, it's clear that, almost in sort of an unexplainable way, the nation has come together to mourn Qassem Soleimani, because, as I said earlier, there are many people who have, a case against what Qassem Soleimani stood for. But overall, those voices have not been heard in the last few days because, sort of mourning took over Iran, and he's become this national hero. And him being a national hero and people coming to the streets have given the Islamic Republic leadership, including Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, a cause to sort of seek to renew in their mind legitimacy with the Iranian people. Do not forget, the Islamic Republic is hugely unpopular inside Iran's borders. You would know it if you look at some of the footage coming out of Iran from the funeral ceremonies, but it's a regime that's hugely unpopular. So what the senior leadership will do is to sort of take advantage of this to consolidate, if you will, boost their legitimacy at home. What it means in terms of Iranian action in the region, I really don't see a major change. I think there are voices that are saying this is a game changer, that nobody can replace Qassem Soleimani. And to some extent, that might be true. He was this sort of charismatic figure once he emerged, because remember, for many years, he was a figure behind the scenes, but he emerged after the outbreak of Arab Spring. He wanted to create a persona for himself in the media. He did that. He was popular. But I would just remind people that the corps he came from, the Revolutionary Guards, is made up of something like 125,000 individuals. There are many other Qassem Soleimanis. And, if Iran decides to continue this path of, if you will, spread its wings and export the revolution and be extraterritorial the way Qassem Soleimani was, then they can continue doing that. Or they can take his killing, the moment Qassem Soleimani was killed in Baghdad, to sort of have a moment of introspection and say, is this worth it? Are we better off being outside of our borders in the defense of the homeland, or should we consolidate back home? Maybe perhaps this is a moment for a bit of a rethink in terms of where we're going, which path we'll be on, and so forth. And it's really early to make that call as of now.
Randa, I'd like to get your thoughts on the Iranian response, the January 7th missile strike in Iraq on the two Iraqi military bases that house U.S. troops. Tehran seemed to be pretty clearly signaling that if the U.S. doesn't respond, they're done, at least for now. Do you think we're headed for de-escalation at this point?
Look, it's hard to tell. I mean, from the looks of it, from the statements, especially the tweets, exchange yesterday, indirect exchange between Minister Zarif on one hand and the president. And the president's statement this morning is that both sides seem to say, okay, we have achieved what we need to achieve for now. Each one of them is claiming a win on their own, for their side. And that at least for now, this round of escalation, it looks like they would like to put it to rest. Now, it doesn't mean that this is one and done kind of reaction from the Iranians. Immediately after the retaliation yesterday, there was a tweet from the Supreme Leader's office saying this was a slap, on U.S. action, but it's not going to be enough. And then this morning, we saw a statement or a tweet from the leader of Asab Ahl al-Haq, Qais al-Khazali, who is a leader of an important Iranian proxy in Iraq, saying that, we also have to avenge the killing of al-Muhandis, because yesterday's strike, Iranian strike, the name of that operation was the martyr Qassem Soleimani. No mention whatsoever of the leader of the deputy leader of the PMF who was killed along with Qassem Soleimani. And so you see now some kind of back and forth between different leaders in Iraq saying, no, we have to avenge him. And then this was reacted to, which is interesting. We see a statement issued by Kataib Hezbollah, which is another Iranian proxy in Iraq, saying, no, this is the time to exercise restraint. This is the time to be careful, which seems to suggest that maybe Tehran was not very happy with Khazali's calls for revenge. And maybe Tehran is trying now to bring its proxies in Iraq under more control in terms of preventing any escalation in Iraq and to keep this round where it is today. And then you see also Muqtada Sadr issuing a tweet saying, we should also exercise restraint. The interest of the Iraqi nation should be first priority for all of us, and that we should not act in any hasty manner until all diplomatic and political means have been exhausted, calling for the appointment of a new prime minister and stuff like that. So I think what we are seeing today is going to be on Iran's hand seems to be that they want to bring this phase to an end. But I don't see this as being the end of all operations in reaction to Qassem Soleimani killing, especially given the tweet from the Supreme Leader's office yesterday. But what we might see going forward is a shift from what happened yesterday, which is for one of the rare times when Iran owned an operation. Until recently, Iran, would be responsible for operation, but it will be done through proxies. And then that creates a room of deniability between Tehran and the operation itself. Yesterday, no, they wanted to own it. And it could be that in the next phase of this retaliation, Iran will shift or revert back to its old modus operandi and act against U.S. interests in different parts of the Middle East through proxies.
Alex, I'm keen to get your thoughts on this as well. Do you think this is over for now, or should we be waiting for the other shoe to drop still from Iran?
I think the way the Iranians retaliated, they had to, engage in this very fine walk. And so far, they seem to have pulled it off. On the one hand, they had to show to the Iranian population and the sort of minority supporters of the Islamic Republic that, look, there are no pushovers, that no U.S. president is going to come out, take out a senior Iranian general, and that there won't be an Iranian retaliation. So that was a minimum requirement. And that was very obvious early on that they had to do something, because it was the U.S., it has to be remembered, had never in the last 40 years done anything like this. So this certainly surprised the Iranians. I mean, my God, it took them many hours before they would even admit to the fact that he had been killed. So they had to do something, and yet the way they went about it, and from the reports we have had so far, they told the Iraqis to tell the Americans that they intended to hit those bases, and some reports are suggesting they actually didn't hit Erbil. They only hit the Assad air base. It needs to be clarified. I'm sure it will be in the future, in the next few days. But the point is, why go through all that trouble to let the Americans know that these missiles are coming their way if they wanted to kill as many Americans as possible? Well, exactly. That's not what they wanted to do. They wanted to tell the Iranian people they did something, and yet they did not want to invite a massive American retaliation, which brings us to the speech that President Trump then gave this morning, which was, well, in his words, Iran stood down. And in many ways, you could say Iran stood down because they didn't want to go for all-out retaliation. If they wanted to do that, it would have been easy for them to turn some of those missiles and guide them towards other bases in the region, in UAE, in Qatar, in Kuwait. I mean, after all, U.S. bases are everywhere around Iran. So they had options, but they chose one place or two places. We'll find out soon. They gave him early warning, get out, we're about to hit you. And that's what the reports are suggesting from the Pentagon, that they had received warning that this was happening. And the American administration of President Trump so far seems to think that this was done deliberately. The Iranians didn't want to kill Americans, or certainly not on a large scale, but they needed to do something. And they gave, by doing this the way they did, they gave President Trump the option of backing away from further escalation and not looking weak. I don't think right now President Trump can or should worry too much about this particular issue being potentially one that could undermine his re-election campaign, which has already started in earnest, because he's already said, as you heard in his speech this morning, we took out Qassem Soleimani, Americans are safe for it.
Randa, Alex just touched on it now, but I'm keen to get your thoughts on President Trump's speech this morning. What struck you as most notable about about his comments today?
Look, I to be very honest, I was positively surprised by it. Given the other alternatives, it could have been much worse than this. I mean, my two takeaways from it is that the tone was pretty good. He did not gloat. He did not engage in any kind of humiliating behavior or humiliating rhetoric for the Iranians. So that's one. But two, most importantly, at least the most important takeaway for me is this reference to his willingness to go back to a multilateral framework involving the Russians, the Chinese, the French, the British, the German, to renegotiate a deal with Iran. Until now, Trump has been reluctant to go that. In fact, he has been trashing the JCPOA. He has been trashing the P5+1 process that led to the JCPOA. And today he seems to suggest he's willing to, re-engage with that process. And that's something that the Iranians have been wanting. Bilateral negotiations between the United States and Iran, which Trump has been trying to achieve, similar to what he's trying to do with North Korea, was not going to be an option for the Iranians. It was not going to happen. And so putting this out as a possibility that, there is a possibility of going back to the P5+1 to renegotiate a deal, because as he said, the JCPOA, is not good, of course, but it's also going to expire soon, which is wrong, by the way. Factually, it's wrong. It's not going to expire anytime soon. But still, given that, this proposal, I think, is going to be looked at positively in Tehran, and also I think it's going to create room for some creative diplomacy by the Russians, by the Chinese, by the EU to relaunch a negotiation track, multilateral negotiation track with Iran.
Randa, I want to, before we wrap up, also touch on, in a little bit more detail, the Iraqi side of things. I'm curious to get your thoughts on Iran's choice of target here. The fact that they chose to strike back against the U.S. by hitting Iraqi military bases, albeit ones that house American troops. How does that kind of complicate the efforts within Iraq to kind of push the U.S. out of the country?
Look, until yesterday, there was a strong momentum ushered in by the Council of Representatives decision last Sunday to resolution, which is non-legally binding, to call for the removal of U.S. forces. And the Iraqi Prime Minister, the U.S. ambassador met, and the readout from the meeting from the Iraqi Prime Minister's office is that they both agreed. The request was from the Iraqi Prime Minister is the importance for the two sides to start agreeing on a plan, on a road plan to act on the resolution passed by the Council of Representatives. I think after the attack yesterday, which many Iraqis were denouncing on social media, and which now has been also denounced by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, by the three presidencies, the President, the Prime Minister office, and the Speaker of the Parliament, seems to put it's going to basically slow the pace of this rush to remove U.S. forces out, because now we have a violation of Iraqi sovereignty by Iran on Iraqi soil, targeting an Iraqi base, albeit it's a base that where U.S. forces and Iraqi forces and other coalition forces are co-located, but still it's an Iraqi base. So I think what's going to happen is you are going to see that decision and that to remove U.S. forces and that momentum which was building up since last Sunday until now to slow down, and maybe that issue will be put to rest for a while.
What I wanted to say was there's been 5 days between the assassination of Qassem Soleimani and the President Trump's speech here on the 8th of January. For 5 days, we've been sort of literally on the brink, and the fear was this could be a regional conflict. And as we've all seen in the media, this captured so many imagination far outside the borders of the Middle East. If you could make the argument that President Trump made a reckless decision and took out an individual the way he did on the 3rd of January, and there wasn't an interagency process in place to hold him back, well, I think the speech he gave on the 8th of January, 5 days later, was the opposite of that. Clearly, the U.S. government fed into this decision to tell the president this is something you campaign against. This is going to be the mother of all wars of the Middle East, and you campaign against ending so-called endless wars in the Middle East. This is not going to look good for you politically. Number two, the U.S. going into the Middle East will only benefit the larger rivals on the international stage, principally Russia and China. And I think, that to me gives me hope that, we're maybe perhaps coming back to a point where the U.S. government as a whole will take part in the decision-making on critical matters like this Iran issue, which for a long time has been the criticism leveled against the Trump administration, that, few individuals were calling the shots. And with this speech today on the 8th of January, President Trump seems to at least signal that, no, he is open to, all sorts of thoughts about the consequences of actions the U.S. takes, and that they can only be welcomed by all of us.
Great. We'll have to leave things there for now. But Randa, Alex, thank you both for joining the podcast today. And thank you as well to our audience for listening in and to our production team for their work on today's program.
Thank you, Alistair. Randa, I toast you from Alexandria. Have a good day in Ohio.
Oh, thank you, Alex, and good day to you all, and Happy New Year to all.
This has been a presentation of the Middle East Institute. To support MEI's programs and podcasts, please donate at www.mei.edu. Thank you for your support.